What if I told you that one of the most damaging and prevalent forms of abuse in the United States is also one of the most hidden, and it happens most often in the church? Spiritual abuse is deeply damaging. It's often hidden, and it looks nothing like Jesus. It has to stop. But if you don't know what it is, you become a target. If you don't recognize it when it happens, then you'll stay in it or you'll justify it. And if we don't talk about it, it will keep happening and we will never truly heal from it. In this video, I want to break down what spiritual abuse is and how to heal from it. I also want to talk about why it's something that has to be addressed. We cannot afford not to talk about spiritual abuse. So what is spiritual abuse? Spiritual abuse is a form of emotional and psychological abuse. All right, here's some things that it includes, and these are all really big deals. I'm going to go through this list, and then we'll explain what each of those are, okay, and how they may look in the church. But spiritual abuse, it includes things like control, manipulation, exploitation, enforced accountability, censorship of decision-making, requirements of secrecy and silence, coercion to conform, requirements of obedience, and a lot of times that's requirements of obedience to the abuser, the suggestion of an abuser having a divine position, isolation as a means of punishment, superiority and elitism. What do all of these things have in common? They're deeply damaging and they can cause a lot of trauma. What else do they have in common? They're overlooked and we don't talk about them enough. Spiritual abuse is a huge deal. It's a huge problem in Western Christianity, and it's something that we've got to talk about because as the church, we can be better and we should be better. So as we're talking about spiritual abuse, I've given you the long list of the definition. This is a really long definition because there are a lot of pieces to this. There are a lot of nuances to spiritual abuse. Now, here's the thing that I think is very important to know. All of these things don't have to be present for something to be spiritual abuse. All that has to be present is one of them in these ways. And the more of these things that are present, the more abusive that a situation, an environment, a leader may be. So let's go ahead and break this down a little further. What does it actually look like to experience spiritual abuse in the church? Okay, well, the first thing that we talked about with spiritual abuse is control. Anytime you're in a religious environment and people are trying to control you, this could look like how you believe, how you behave, who you date, who you marry, the decisions you make, when they're trying to control you in a way that is above and beyond simply, hey, these are the expectations of a Christian, right? When they're trying to control you and people are fighting for control, that is spiritually abusive. And one of the things that we see in the church is we see a lot of narcissistic leaders who are drawn to the platform because they're charismatic and they're fun and they're good teachers. Yet what you'll see is they may have a lot of good about them. People may love them, but do they fight for control? Abusive leaders are always going to fight for control. Another marker is manipulation. So let's talk about manipulation. How could that look like in the church? That could be manipulating scripture to get people to do certain things, to act a certain way, maybe taking scripture out of context or using proof texting to get you to do something they want you to do. It could be manipulating messages to get congregants to do what they want to do. It could be manipulating relationships to get you to do what they want you to do, to think the way that they want you to think, right? Any sort of manipulation in a spiritual setting by a spiritual leader is going to be spiritual abuse. And that could be a pastor, it could be a staff member, it could also be a leader like a small group leader, right? It could be anyone who has some sort of spiritual or organizational authority over you in a religious setting. Another big piece of spiritual abuse is exploitation. It's one that we don't talk about enough. So what is exploitation? It's basically using someone for your own gain. What does that look like in the church? It could look like serving for really long hours with no pay. Are you serving 10, 15, 20 hours a week on top of a normal job and you're not getting paid. It could look like serving that many hours every week because you're trying to earn a spot on staff. You feel called to ministry and you want to get into ministry and on staff so bad that you're giving free labor with no pay, even though you don't know if there's going to be any opportunity to jump on staff. Those are both ways that we see exploitation happen a lot in churches. Exploitation could look like someone serving in multiple ministries because what your leaders are telling you is that there's a huge need. And if we're going to do what God has called us to do, if we're going to reach this next pinnacle, if we're going to reach people, then we need more volunteers, even though, and they're willing to take you as a volunteer, even though they know you're volunteering in 1, 2, 3 ministries already, right? So if you're volunteering in multiple ministries and people are still telling you about the need and allowing you to over-volunteer without saying, hey, let's be careful, we don't want to burn you out. If that's happening, it may be exploitation, right? We've already talked about volunteering long hours trying to get on staff. This could be, hey, exploitation could be as simple as you're being used for your gifts, talents, connections, money. There's something you have. Like I said, it could be your network, your money, certain abilities and talents that you have, and people are using you for those things. And this isn't, it's not exploitation when someone just allows you to use those gifts because you want to. But when you have leaders who are constantly using you for these things and asking you for these things, whether you volunteered them or not, that could become exploitation. Now, is it exploitation every time? No. And if it's isolated, it doesn't happen often, it's probably not exploitation, but it can become exploitation very quickly. Another marker of spiritual abuse, we talked about it, it's enforced accountability. What does that mean? Okay? I want to say this and I want to be clear. Accountability is not bad. Okay, but consistent, enforced accountability can be abusive. It could look like this. It could look like leaders who care so much about you and they tell you, man, I care so much about you and I want you to do the right thing so bad that they begin to hold a tight line of enforced accountability. And it may feel crazy. It may feel like it crosses a line, but oftentimes we don't see it because they tell us how much they care about us and how much they believe in us and how much they love us. A great example of this would be Alan Scott. Okay, Alan Scott has pastored in the UK. He pastors Vineyard Anaheim, or what was formerly Vineyard Anaheim in the United States right now, right? But he said this one time to staff members about congregants and volunteers who miss church. He said to tell volunteers, hey, if you sleep in and miss church, then you let the whole community down, and we can't have that here, okay? When a spiritual leader, like a pastor, like Alan Scott, tells a volunteer who slept in and missed a service that because you slept in, you missed a service, or you didn't come to church this week, or you didn't volunteer this week, that you let the whole community down, and we can't have that here, that's manipulation to make you feel guilt and shame. You did not let the whole community down because you didn't come one week. But the whole idea of we can't have that here, that's enforced accountability. It essentially tells a person that, hey, if you want to follow Jesus and you want to love Jesus well, then you have to show up every week, right? And that's where it becomes enforced accountability and exploitation of a kind, right? Enforced accountability could look like this. Someone stops tithing or their giving goes down for a month. And what happens? A pastor calls them to check on them. We want to check on you to make sure that everything's going well. They tell you things like, we don't want your money, but we don't want you to forfeit God's blessing in your life. And we noticed that your giving went down or you stopped tithing, and we're just scared that you're going to forfeit God's blessing in your life. We want you to be blessed, so we just wanted to call and reach out. No, that's enforced accountability. And even though it sounds good, they're enforcing accountability and they're making you feel bad because your giving has went down or you've stopped tithing. It's no longer you're being generous because God's called you to be generous or because you want to be generous. You're being generous because someone is calling you and checking on you when you're not, okay? It could look like with the tithing, continuing on that, it could look like removing someone from a volunteer or staff role because they're not tithing enough. That happens more often than we would like to admit, where people get removed from these roles, volunteer and staff, because they're not giving enough. This could look like, and this happens at a lot of multi-site mega churches, where a staff member can be fired if their giving dips below 10%. Let's say someone gives 9.98% because they didn't tithe, because they didn't give enough. Enforced accountability is you get disciplined, and worst case scenario, if it happens too many times, you could lose your job, even if it's 1 or 2 percentage points off of your giving. Enforced accountability could look like requiring counseling or therapy, or maybe even just extensive mentorship or coaching after someone has a sinful action or a sinful sexual encounter, or they commit any sort of sin that's on the big no-no list in churches. You know what some of those are, right? Someone does something that is frowned upon, that doesn't look good, that they don't want happening, something that bothers them, and now they're forced to go to counseling or get mentorship or go through a long coaching program just so that they can continue to volunteer or you can continue to be on staff. That would be enforced accountability. The next marker we talk about is censorship of decision-making, right? This could look like caring about what you're doing outside of the church, things that aren't necessarily spiritual in nature, and having spiritual leaders who are trying to help you make decisions and trying to coerce you to make decisions about certain things like where you're going to go to college, who you're going to marry, who you're going to date, whether or not you're going to take a job or not, what you post on social media or not, right? Those are all censorship of decision-making. And a lot of times it happens because it sounds good. You know, we care about what you post on social media because we want you to represent the kingdom well. We care about whether you take this job or that job because we want you to be blessed. We want this to be God-honoring. But at the end of the day, that's spiritual leaders who are censoring your decision-making about non-spiritual things or things that are not their decision to make. The next qualifier or the next indicator of spiritual abuse is requirements of secrecy and silence. This one is absolutely huge. This is when someone in the church, regardless of what it's about, they tell you, hey, don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone. What happens here stays here. Practically, this could look like NDAs, non-disclosure or non-disparagement agreements that are given to volunteers or staff to keep you silent about something that you've seen. This includes NDAs that are given to staff members that are contingent on you don't get a severance unless you stay quiet about things you know and things you've seen that usually need to come into the light, right? The requirements of secrecy and silence could look like a spiritual leader telling you, if you tell anyone what you saw or if you tell anyone what you heard, it's just going to divide the church. It's just going to cause people to walk away from God. And you don't want to do that, do you? You don't want to hurt people. You don't want to hurt God. You don't want to hurt the church. You don't want to get in the way of the mission. Those things, again, sound good, but we should never hurt the church by telling the truth. We should never hurt God or the kingdom by telling the truth. So these are usually just things that sound good to keep us in secrecy and silence. The next indicator of spiritual abuse, coercion to conform. Coercion to conform. This, you may have seen this, you may not, but this looks very practically like a Bible study teacher or a pastor or a spiritual leader weaponizing scripture or weaponizing other peer relationships you have to get you to conform to the accepted standard of behavior. It could be using weaponizing scripture or relationships to get you to stop asking questions or to get you to act in a prescribed manner. Okay. Any way that you are coerced to conform to a certain standard of behavior or act in a different way than you would normally act, right? The next indicator is requirements of obedience. And again, a lot of times this is requirements of obedience to the abuser. That may be a pastor, it may be a church leader, it may be someone that you've just allowed to mentor you, disciple you, right? And it goes along with the last one a lot, but requirements of obedience, it's any time that there is discipline, guilt, shame, or isolation that's used to correct a person who doesn't conform. If you don't conform, you don't do what we want you to do, then we discipline you, we guilt you, we shame you, or we isolate you. We remove you from a volunteer position. We remove you from the church. We move you to a different place where you can't be seen. Those are all requirements of obedience. And if you're not obedient, you're going to get punished. That's what it feels like. If I'm not obedient, if I don't do what these people ask me to do, I'll be punished. That's requirements of obedience, and that is spiritual abuse. Another indicator is the suggestion of the abuser having a divine position. This could be when maybe a pastor talks about themselves this way, elders talk about them this way, other leaders talk about them this way. but that's when you talk about the man of God. And instead of being the pastor being someone who is another part of the body who has the gift of shepherding or the gift of leadership or the gift of teaching, now we don't look at them as another person in the body exercising their gift, but instead we look at them as special, as unique, as the man of God or a spiritual father, or, it's a lot of times this may look like a pastor telling you, hey, whatever I'm trying to get you to do or I'm pushing you to do that makes you feel uncomfortable, it comes along with a phrase like, remember, I'm your pastor. Remember, I'm your spiritual father. Remember, God has put me in authority over you. It's that suggestion that they have a divine position and you need to listen to them, because listening to them is like listening to God. And when that happens, that is a form of spiritual abuse. The next indicator, isolation as a means of punishment. We talked about isolation a little bit, but this could look like, again, you're a volunteer or a staff member and you're removed from your volunteer position or your staff role because you're not a team player, or because you need to get healthy after you've had a disagreement with someone else, okay? All of those are reasons why they say, hey, we need to remove you from this position, put you somewhere else, when really it's not that you're not healthy, it's not that you don't care, but you've disagreed with someone, you've done something that has got you on the outs, okay? Isolation is a means of punishment. It could also look like no longer being invited to things that you used to be invited to. All of a sudden, you're not invited to the cookout or the party with the in crowd. You're not invited to take part in certain volunteer roles because someone's got mad at you, or they got frustrated with you, or even because you said no to a volunteering opportunity, or you put up a boundary to protect yourself and your family. Now people are upset, so you're not getting invited to things, you're not getting opportunities. Isolation as a means of punishment could also look like gossip about you. Gossip about you in inner circles that you used to be a part of. Right? It could look like being shunned by community members and friends at the church after you leave. And I know a lot of the subscribers to our channel, a lot of the listeners to our podcast, they say that I was shunned by a community or by friends in my faith community after I left the church. That's isolation as a means of punishment. We've already talked about NDAs, but this is a great spot to bring those up again. NDAs basically isolate you. You can't talk about what you experienced and what you saw under threat of legal punishment and legal action. Okay, that's isolation as a means of punishment. And at its worst, this doesn't happen very often, but it still does happen. Okay, I know people who've experienced it, and to a degree I've experienced it myself. But isolation as a means of punishment ultimately could end in excommunication. You're not allowed to be a part of this church. You're not allowed to be a part of this faith community. Or you have certain rights that are taken away. Some of the last ones, indicators of spiritual abuse, superiority or elitism. A lot of times superiority or elitism, it looks like an us versus them mentality. That, hey, there's a special calling on our church. There's a special calling on what we get to do. What we get to do is special. And there's a lot of good churches around, but God is doing something special through us, or special through our denomination, or special through this movement. Those are all things that indicate superiority or elitism, right? Anytime that a church or leaders are using othering terms and making people outside of that organization seem like they're less than, that is a form of spiritual abuse, because it's a form of coercion and manipulation. The truth is, all of these things cause very real trauma. Hear me. Every single one of these, there's a reason why we're calling them spiritual abuse. Some of them, you may say, hey, are they really that bad? Yes. You may not feel like they're that bad. You may feel like, hey, I'm making a big deal out of nothing. Or you may be thinking, Jeff, you're a stinking snowflake, man, getting upset and calling all these little things abuse. Here's why they're abuse. This isn't my definition. This is the kind of working definition that experts are using right now. And I actually borrowed it, got this definition from Escaping the Maze of Spiritual Abuse. Incredible book. I'll put a link in the description to that book. But the reason why these are abusive actions is because these are actions that cause very real trauma in a spiritual setting, especially when you've experienced patterns of these behaviors, patterns in one area or multiple of these behaviors overlapping. And a pattern of just one of these behaviors can be spiritual abuse. Again, we don't have to have all of the parts of the definition for it to be spiritual abuse. If you've experienced any of these things and you've experienced them in a pattern, they're not just happening once, they're not just isolated incidents, then you may have experienced spiritual abuse, and that's likely caused some real trauma. What's trauma? Trauma is simply an emotional response to a negative event. Do you have an emotional response to a negative event? And usually, immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical. And a lot of times when people experience spiritual abuse right after the event, that's what they're going to talk about. I was in shock. I was in denial, right? That comes from the American Psychological Association talking about trauma. Another definition of trauma, we're talking about, what is spiritual abuse? Trauma could be any event that is emotionally disturbing or distressing, any event that is psychologically or emotionally stressful in a way that leads to serious mental problems. And right after trauma, almost every survivor will find it hard to stop thinking about what happened. After you experience trauma, it will be very difficult to stop thinking about what happened. So if you've experienced any of these things that we talked about in the video today, and you keep replaying them in your head time after time after time, you may think this is not a big deal. Why can't I let go of this? Why can't I stop thinking about this? The reason you can't stop thinking about it is because it may have been abuse, and it's likely caused you trauma. Stress reactions like fear, anxiety, upsetting memories, efforts to avoid reminders or efforts to avoid things that kind of trigger you or make you think about it again, those are all going to gradually decrease over time for most people. But here's the deal. Here's why this is so important. If we don't deal with those things, if we don't deal with our trauma, if we act like it's no big deal, when not dealt with, your trauma will often lead to things like PTSD. Okay, and I cannot tell you the amount of people I know who had spiritual abuse that they never dealt with, they never talked about, and it has resulted in post-traumatic stress disorder diagnoses from therapists for them, and it's affected their relationship with God. It has affected their relationship with the church. So let me encourage you to do this, okay? If you've experienced trauma, don't ignore it. If trauma is felt, if you felt trauma, then it's real. If trauma is felt, it is real. And no one, hear me, no one gets to tell you it's not trauma. No one gets to tell you that you should just get over it. Those are abusive actions in and of themselves. Spiritual abuse is a big deal, and it's much more common than most of us think. Recent research indicates that 1/3, that is huge, 1/3 of U.S. adults have experienced religious trauma. 1/3 of adults in the United States have experienced religious trauma. Research also tells us it's estimated that 1 in 5 adults are currently suffering from major religious trauma symptoms. So 1 out of every 5 people that you see are currently suffering from religious trauma symptoms, whether that's recent or it's still symptoms from something that happened to them a long time ago. In a spiritual abuse study just among Christians, this wasn't any other religion, just among Christians, 2/3 of the respondents admitted to experiencing spiritual abuse. This is happening way too often, but it keeps happening because we aren't educated about it, we don't know what spiritual abuse is, and we don't talk about it. Okay, but spiritual abuses, they can cause significant trauma, they can lead to depression, they can lead to anxiety, they can lead to things like PTSD, yet they tend to remain hidden because no one wants to hurt the church and because we're fearful of retaliation. I want you to know today, if you've experienced spiritual abuse, you can talk about it without hurting the church, and you may be fearful of retaliation for a reason. But if we don't talk about what we've experienced because of fear of retaliation, here's what I can promise. It's going to keep happening, not just to you, but to other people as well. So if you're watching this video, you made it this far, and you think that you may have experienced spiritual abuse, let me encourage you to get help. Okay, here's what I would encourage you to do. Number 1, if you think you've experienced spiritual abuse, remove yourself from that situation or environment. Remove yourself from that environment and get safe. That's the number 1 thing. Get safe first. The second thing, I want to encourage you to talk to someone about it. The first step to healing is usually to talk about what you went through and to get it out in the light. You don't have to talk to everybody. You don't have to go public, but you do need to talk to someone. That can mean talking to a therapist, a life coach, a really good friend that you trust, a family member who's going to genuinely listen. It can be anybody. You can even join a community like our community at Church Disrupted. There's no wrong way to do this as long as you can find a safe person that you can process with, okay? Here's 2 things I'm going to ask you not to do, okay? 2 things not to do because they're going to hurt you more than help when you're dealing with spiritual abuse. Number 1, don't keep it to yourself hoping it's going to go away. If you keep it to yourself, it's not going to go away. That those symptoms, that trauma, it's only going to grow. It's going to get worse, and it's going to affect other people around you. And number 2, don't talk to your abuser about it or someone complicit in the abuse first. Okay? If you want to talk to your abuser, that is fine. There's a time to talk to them directly about it. You know, that's even biblical, to talk to people directly about the issues you have with them. But if the first person that you talk to is an abuser or someone who is complicit in it, you actually run the risk of being gaslit into thinking that nothing's wrong and that you're the problem. And when that happens, that only leads to further abuse and further trauma because it's just kind of a cycle that people tend to get stuck in. So make sure the first person you talk to is someone that you can trust, someone who's outside of the situation, so that if anyone tries to tell you it's not a big deal or they try to gaslight you into thinking that it's not something you need to deal with, you have a voice of truth in your life that can say, no, that's not okay, and you do need to push with this. Here's the deal. You can heal. You can heal from spiritual abuse. It just takes time. One step, one day, and 1 month at a time, you can get there, and you are not alone. You're not alone in the slightest. If you found this video helpful, you can check out other videos or consider subscribing to our channel for more content like this. But hey, no matter what, remember this. We're in your corner, and there are better days ahead.